Hey everyone, welcome to Women Leading the Way by Drofa Combs, a podcast about women shaping the future of finance, fintech, blockchain, and technology. Here we don't talk about titles or success stories, we talk about real moments that shape a career and how leadership changes when women are in the room. I'm Maria, and in each episode we explore one big career through personal journey. Today, we are talking about careers, talent, and diversity in fintech, how people enter the industry, what helps them grow, and why some voices still have to work harder to be heard. Our guest is Nadia co-founder and chief customer officer at Harrington Star, a recruitment firm specializing in financial services and fintech. Nadia has spent nearly 2 decades helping companies build teams and professionals grow their careers. She's also the host of Fintech's DI discussions, the author of Fintech Women Walk the Talk, and creator of initiatives focused on making overlooked talent more visible. Together, we'll talk about Nadia's own journey, what years of working in recruitment have taught her about the industry, and how companies can recognize talent, support women, and create more inclusive path into leadership. So Nadia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Maria. And I love all the work that you're doing on podcasts such as this. I think it's super important to enable people to storytell so we can all learn from one another. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And I actually have to admit that interviewing someone who has hosted more than 600 episodes, that puts a little bit of pressure on me. But it also gives us a very great place to start because your own career didn't begin with a perfect plan. I read in some of your interviews that you said that you fell into recruitment after university and you didn't even fully understand what the job involved. And you also described that the beginning of your career was something like sink or swim. And you said that at first you sank. So maybe let's start here. How do you find your way into recruitment in fintech?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I totally fell into it. So I had done 2 degrees at a school within University College London, UCL. The first being history, the second being international relations. So I had no, great desire to join the city and financial services and the world of recruitment. I thought that I'd work maybe in the Foreign Office or something to do with international relations or politics, and that wasn't the path for me. 25 years ago, when I came out of university, a lot of roles, if you wanted to get into the Foreign Office, meant that you'd have to work unpaid for 6 months or a year, and that wasn't an option for me. I needed to be in a paid role. So I started branching out my search, and I was picked up by a recruiter who then put me into a recruitment interview. And 10 minutes before going into the interview, he said, right, this is a candidate, this is a client, this is what recruiters do. They put candidates and clients together. And I was like, what are you talking about? What candidate, what client? And then said, oh, and by the way, your interview's in 10 minutes. I'm going to walk you there now. It was an absolute whirlwind. I didn't do well in that interview, but I started to learn about what the job was. And I think back in 2004, 2005, the world of recruitment was very binary. It was about specific vacancies and exactly who can match and whose skill set can match in those vacancies. And there were really lots of gaps back then. But of course, I went to my first interview and had no idea about any of this. But I did quite like the concept of helping people and helping them on their career journeys. And without knowing these words, I realized early on that I actually really enjoyed advocating for people, standing up for them, making sure that I was giving them the best chance possible. And that's what attracted me to recruitment. And I think back then, that attraction was very unique. Recruitment was very transactional. It was very binary. The success factors was around quantity and numbers rather than what sort of difference will this make to somebody's life? And because I was driven quite differently and my motivations were quite unique in that space, I could identify lots of what I saw were problems that not everybody was getting advocated for. And definitely people weren't getting advocated for fairly. And I think that initial experience, and yes, I did sink to begin with, but when I started to swim and understand the process and the mechanics around recruitment back in 2005, I realized this is set up for a certain type of person to succeed, and definitely not for another type of person. And really that set the foundation of my whole career. Back then I didn't know that that's what was happening, but now looking back on it, I can really evaluate it in that very clear way.
That's incredible. And maybe there was a particular moment when you realized, like, this is exactly the part of the job that really matters to me. Maybe a particular candidate or placement that you made.
My first ever placement, right? Like, and I tell this story a lot to new recruiters when they join our company, because I think it's really easy for you to talk to somebody who's senior in the industry, in any industry, and you to think, wow, like, how did they get there, right? So I love really breaking that down. And I think this is something for any leader out there. I really shock people. I say, look, let me tell you that my first ever placement, it was a woman into, it was actually a gaming company. So, and we called it, an e-commerce firm back then, but really, it's all payments,
Mm.
And basically, I definitely stood up for her. I said that, she was amazing, but all on like the cultural side of things, all on her personality, nothing actually like on her skill set, because I didn't know what I was doing, right? Anyway, when she got the offer, the HR called me from this company and said, we want to offer your candidate. This is how much we want to offer her. This is our bonus. This is our package. And then she must have known that I was very junior and didn't know what I was doing, because she said, would you like to write this down? And this was pre Teams call, pre Zoom. This was, 2004, 2005. So she could have heard on the phone that I was like, okay. And she knew I wasn't writing it down. So this wonderful HR woman supported me through doing my first placement. And I love telling recruiters that story, because I really had the best intentions, but I had the worst execution because I didn't know. And that was a pinnacle moment for me, because I was so proud of playing a part in that woman's life, that she got a role in this incredible company. And I was so grateful that that HR director showed me some care and kindness to get the job done. That care and kindness that I was not finding anywhere else in the industry at all. And, I look back at that moment and it was so defining for me, because it's helped me become the person that I am in recruitment, that we can bring kindness to every day. We can advocate for people, and we need to be continually learning and remain humble that we never know it all. And I definitely knew nothing back then. I know a lot more now, but I still want to be on that learning curve and learning journey.
Women leading the way. And I think that the idea of standing up for people also explain the kind of company you went to build on. And when you co-founded Harrington Star, in one of your interviews also, you said that you wanted to make recruitment based on trust, relationships, not just putting people for open role. So what did you feel was missing from the recruitment at that period of time when you realized you wanted to build on this? And how did you want Harrington Star to do things differently?
I think, especially back in 2010, one of the biggest issues with the recruitment space, and I still think this is an issue now for recruitment, was the lack of trust. And, everyone, you talk to anyone in any industry about a recruitment experience that they've had, and their first one will be a negative one. Mm. And that is such a shame for our industry. And I do think, back in 2010, when we were thinking, how do we do this better? It was about that trust, and it was about that quality of service. Now, back in 2010, no one spoke about customer service from a recruitment perspective, right? And so that became one of our foundational pillars. People need to enjoy working with us. We want them to tell their friends that we added value to them, that we left them with a positive impact. Because ultimately, when someone is moving job or hiring for their next person, this is a stressful point in their life. And we need to acknowledge that. And since we are the people that are doing it day in, day out, and aware and in many cases in charge of a process, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're looking after both sides of the coin. And that word responsibility was something that just was not around in recruitment. Recruitment was about, let's make as many placements as possible. And this was the vibe in the industry back then. And don't forget, by 2010, we'd just been through a terrible recession as well. So it was a moment of change, right, for the industry. And we thought this is a perfect time to sort of establish what we want to do. Now, the words that we would describe for Harrington Starr and why we're different now are not the words we used back then, because these are words that the whole world recognizes now. So we are community-led, we are engagement-led, we are all about delivering value and impact, right? But the words back in 2010, we didn't know how to describe it like that. So because, what was community back then? What was online engagement? It wasn't where we are now. But what we did want to do is we wanted to make sure that we were building trust with people and we were adding value to them when they weren't looking for work and when they weren't hiring, so that the trust was established before they actually have a need to move job or a need to hire. And this was completely new for the recruitment space, because in recruitment, it was always, back then especially, it was always a fast and a quick win and quick turnover from a hello to a client to a we've made a placement with you. And actually what we were saying is we want to build embedded long-term understanding of our clients and of our candidates and what they want. We want to add value long-term. And we want this to be a relationship that lasts. And, a lot of our competitors just didn't understand what we were doing. But now, 16 years later, when we have, that foundation of our business is what has got us through the pandemic, what has got us through the last 3 years of a slump in the industry in terms of hiring. It is people coming back to us, so repeat customers and referred customers. People saying, I loved working with Nadia in 2015. Here, I want you to work with her. And people say the same for my CEO, Toby Babb. We had a call the other day and the man on the phone said, I worked with Toby in 2011. And this is it. We have been building relationships for 16 years that are meant to last. And that is a very different way of looking at the recruitment space. So we're really proud of what we've done. But ultimately, I think in recruitment, you have to do a good job by understanding your client and your candidate super well and understanding them beyond the baseline. This is not just about previous experience and skills gained right now. It's what's happening next. It's a movable thing all the time because we're dealing with human beings. And that's something I will always talk about.
That's fantastic. And also you're working in fintech industry, so it makes even more specific everything. And I think that your own journey also gives a very personal side of the recruitment, but through Harrington Starr, you've seen how fintech companies building their teams, what skills they're looking for, how they assess people, and maybe how the talent market changed. So I'd love to look on the industry side as well. Fintech changes very rapidly. And since you started, the market also changed a lot. So what are the biggest changes you've seen in the fintech space and the roles companies hiring and for the past few years?
So it's been fascinating to watch. I've absolutely loved it. If we roll all the way back to 2010 when we started the business, we of course had relationships with, your traditional financial services players. But as fintech started to grow and challenge the traditional ways of finance, this wonderful thing appeared, and it was purposeful businesses, mission-led businesses, which has just made recruitment so much more enjoyable to understand. What are the drivers behind each of these businesses, and what are you trying to achieve? And actually, when you're trying to support somebody in their next role, being able to match their personal drivers with that of a business is that's what recruitment's all about, because that's when people give their best work and when they're learning at such a pace. And I think, over the past couple of years, we've seen a bit of a decline in that, which has been so disappointing. But look, let's just remember what's happened in the past few years. We had the post-pandemic boom, right, which fintechs, payments, like, wow, they were just, loving life. Everyone was online. When we think about all the digitalization of cash, there's so many things to think about. We've also seen, the real onset and implementation of AI and the adoption on, mass scale. There's been huge changes, but, after that boom, after the pandemic, there's been a huge focus on fintechs where I would say like the valuation bubble burst. Like you remember sort of post-pandemic, it was this fintech's valued at that, that's valued at that. But actually, what were their profits? And then we had sort of 2024 where all the news was what the real profits are. And there's no point if you're spending 100 grand and you're bringing in 20. Well, then you can't just say you're making 20 grand. That you're actually losing 80. And I know I've really simplified that, but actually this was the story. It was almost like bam, 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 one after the other, where a lot of fintechs then turned around and said, right, we've got to make redundancies. We've got to be much more lean. And this lean attitude has, I think, got way too extreme. And I think a lot of them have got too skinny. They have merged 5 roles into one, and often one person looking after what 5 people used to look after. So there's been the change has almost meant that mission has taken a back foot. And I really think that's a shame, because across the whole industry, we are hearing less about what the actual mission is. We're hearing less about what companies are doing for people. Having said that, there are still pockets of amazing businesses that are really human-centric, that are really mission-led, and that's what keeps me really interested in fintech. But we're going through some challenging years. There's been less funding, there's been less investment. Obviously, there's been less hires. It means that there's more people that have been out of work, and these are experienced people who've worked for 15, 20 years within the industry, and now they're out of work, and there aren't the level of vacancies for them to apply to. That's a challenge. That's a big challenge for a lot of people who maybe last time they looked for work was 10 years ago, and now they're dealing with AI in the recruitment process. So it's very challenging. But this is what I'm definitely here for, to support those people through this difficult time.
Women Leading the Way podcast.
You also touched on AI, and I have a question regarding the AI for you as well, because it changes a lot in like companies and the way we work with the fintech, finance, but also with the recruitment process. And how do you see like AI changing fintech jobs and recruitment itself?
So AI changing recruitment, I think you'd be surprised actually how many companies don't want to use AI in their recruitment process. However, the ones that are using AI in the recruitment process are the company names that everyone recognizes, right? So you read that in the newspaper and you think, oh, wow, everyone's doing it. So it's quite overwhelming. But there are many, many companies that don't want to do it, that want to keep the human-centric approach, that have read the horror stories and said, we don't want to be missing out on talent because we are assuming and we're trying to automate a large number of applications. So I think that's the first thing. But also, I do think that, if you think about the hype curve of AI, I do think we're kind of over the top, the summit of it. And the reason why I say that is because you remember the times when the demos at different events were showing what a coder would take 3 days to write this piece of code, and suddenly someone's pressing a button after a clever prompt, and in 30 minutes, like 3 days worth of work is done. And yes, that is the case, but you still need someone to check that. And you still need someone who's got a really deep understanding and knowledge to check that. And then to test it and make sure it's actually doing what you've asked it to do. So I think what's happening now, and what we at Harrington Start are really spending a lot of time trying to promote, is how the human being can be upskilled with AI rather than replaced by AI. I also think a huge part of this conversation has to be succession planning from a talent management point of view. Because yes, a lot of people will say in one sentence, oh, well, AI will replace some of the lower level jobs. But what happens in 3 years' time when someone needs someone with 3 years worth of experience, someone who's about to move into mid-level data analysis? Where will those people be if we've not thought about succession planning? And there'll be different ways of entering them into a business, different ways of giving them experience, but that needs to be thought about. And in this race for speed in the industry, I urge people to slow down and think about the tomorrow before we get there. Because I have been in the industry for 22 years, and I remember 2012 so vividly. That year, I had so many companies across fintech and financial services saying to me, "Where's everyone with 3 or 4 years experience?" And I would say to them, "What are you talking about? What were you doing 3 or 4 years ago? Were you hiring grads? Were you training people up, or were you telling me we're never hiring again?" And I know that question in 2012 is on its way to me next year and the year after. So I really urge people, if you're going to think about AI and what you're afraid of, what you're excited of with AI, think about succession planning. It has to be your second point. And I think there's a huge opportunity around succession planning. I think it's exciting if only we give it the time that it needs.
Wonderful. And I also wonder, maybe with the AI, companies start to look for different skills. Like, they competing for technical talent because, vibe coding and everything is possible with AI so easily. Maybe different skills such as like communication, adaptability, commercial thinking become more important for companies in this way.
Yeah, definitely. I do lots of talks at different universities, and I always speak about this, that adaptability, that following your passion. Like you speak to any hiring manager out there, right? And they could be utilizing, adopting, defining, creating AI like to 100% of the time, let's say. And they will still be impressed by somebody who is so passionate about a piece of work or a piece of something to do with their business and has done all their research, has read all the different angles, has tried out their own bits of vibe coding, has looked at exactly how they're using AI and thinking, why don't you use AI that way? That is exactly what you just said. That's someone who's inquisitive. That's someone who's curious. That's someone who has a deep drive for that particular piece. That's personality. That's characteristic. That's a type of person, and I think that every person, they just need to find their passion for all of that to grow. For me, it's no longer a capability thing. I think actually where I get really excited about AI is AI can allow for the capability to grow around what your passion is and what truly engages you and your personality type. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, but I think this is also the definition of successful career for the next 5 years in fintech, being adaptive in the market. Yeah. So far, we've been talking about like the talent market and how it's changing, what companies are looking for now. But like, I guess that entering fintech is just only the beginning, because the next question is whether people are supported correctly, whether they have like the real chance to grow, to progress. And this is something you've explored so much during your podcast and your book and your initiatives like Talent Equity List as well. So I'd love to unpack a little bit this side of your work. You launched Fintech DI's discussion in 2019, and the podcast now has grown more than 600 episodes, which is crazy. And what made you feel that fintech space really needed this place for the conversations, for the exchange?
I saw a gap and an opportunity. And the opportunity for me was that, lots of people back in 2019, they just weren't thinking about their staff in a longevity point of view. And I know that sounds crazy coming from a recruiter. And a lot of people, they get confused when I talk about reskilling people, retraining people, retaining staff within an organization. And I think that's all about how you progress people. And often people will say to me, well, but you're a recruiter, so actually you want people to leave. But I want to be a good recruiter. I want Harrington Starr to be the best recruiter out there, that candidates know that if we're going to find them a job, they're going to be in an organization that truly looks after them, that supports them, that believes in them, and that gives them new opportunities for themselves to grow and different career opportunities. That's what I want us to be known for, and that's what I think we do a lot of. So, back in 2019, I was really obsessed with how do we do this better, and why is it that my visibility of the industry like people just don't believe it to be true because they don't see it themselves. And ultimately, the recruitment process is flawed. And that is because we still use things that were invented hundreds of years ago, not hundreds, but, so many years ago. Like the CV in the guise that it is now, like we haven't moved on from that. The application process, there are still panel style interviews that people think are a good way of getting the best out of someone. The trend in hiring is still we're going to interview somebody to catch them out rather than set them up for success and catch them in. So when I talk about interviews, I'm also thinking about promotions and progression, like who to put on the project and all of this. So I just felt that there was this gap that needed filling. And so, there was also a big issue that I face all the time, which is around the perception of hiring minority talent. So the perception of the availability of women in tech. There are too many people, even to this day, that said, oh, I put an advert out when I was hiring. No women applied, so they didn't have the right skill set, so we just hired another man. And they accept full shortlists of only one gender demographic. Like that's not on. We should not be allowing that, especially when people do exist. All genders are out there working in amazing jobs and looking for work, So I wanted to debunk a lot of this, and I wanted to be able to showcase to the industry the amazing work that's happening. And that's where the podcast started. And I'm so grateful I'm grateful for everybody. They're all 640, I think we are now, because everyone there has shared their personal story, and they've all answered the one question that I ask, which is, what does inclusion mean to you? And they've all answered that in a different way. And I've had so many people against me on this journey saying, oh, isn't it repetitive? Don't people all say the same thing? And I'm like, well, that's the point, because we're talking about inclusion and everyone has a different perspective on it. And that's what we need to learn.
Women leading the way.
I also had a question. What kind of similar perspectives did you notice during talking with so many people? And you also put more than over 100 conversations with women into your book, like Fintech, Women Walk the Talk. And so what made you decide to turn those conversations into the book? Maybe some kind of stories had similar patterns that became impossible to ignore. What else?
Yeah. The patterns are so interesting. And I always try and highlight the patterns. So like every week I will do a short video, 1 minute on LinkedIn, but I will highlight a pattern that I've seen in recent podcasts. I used to write for Forbes, and again, I would highlight patterns. My last two articles I wrote for the Fintech Times, one celebrating male allyship and different forms of male allyship. And then my last one was highlighting the risk factors across the industry if we're not thinking diversely. But what I do is I bring together people's points of view. So when I wrote my book, it was after the first 100 episodes of the podcast, which were all with women to start with before I opened it up to all genders. And I had felt at that point that they'd taken me on the best university degree of my life. Like I hadn't learned so much in all my years of recruitment and all my years of academia as I did by having those 100 conversations. And that's why I wrote the book, because actually, if someone's going to say to you, oh, but women don't exist in fintech, or women are such a tiny minority in financial services, well, actually, they're 40% of financial services and 28% of fintech, right? So not that tiny, but it really is what you want to see and what you allow yourself to see. So my book was more of like a respect to all the women in the industry. And also in my book, I put all their bios at the front of the book to show to anyone who ever picked up that book, wow, look at how many women are quoted in this book. I wanted people to feel overwhelmed with the sheer powerful presence of these amazing women. And I think that is the vibe that I've continued on with, rather than me just saying to people, of course, women exist in this industry, or of course, people from whatever minority background we're talking about exist here. I'm just going to show evidence. I'm not going to get into the arguments or the debates anymore. I'm just going to say, well, that's the evidence. You don't see the evidence because you don't allow yourself to see the evidence. That is the responsibility I think I have now. And I think that drives better recruitment, better ways of thinking. It goes straight back to what we're supposed to be doing, which is serving the communities that we're supposed to be serving in fintech, by having proper representation within companies. So I think all my work makes the industry a better place, but it's not easy for a lot of people. They find it quite challenging, but I'm open to that as well. And I invite those people on the podcast too.
That's incredible. And you also created the talent equity list. And the idea behind it is very clear. Like the talent exists, but it's not converting into enough of opportunities. So my question is, where did the conversion actually break down? Is the biggest challenge maybe in attracting women into fintech, retaining them or promoting them or giving them access to senior leadership? Or what is the breakdown for conversion?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a few areas of breakdown. I think firstly, when people interview, I think that so there's a wonderful TED talk on this, and it's actually about funding, but it translates perfectly for interviews. And in this TED talk, they spoke about how men, when they pitch for funding, are asked questions that are upward trending questions, positive questions. How big could this go? What's the opportunity? How much return on investment do you think we'd get? Whereas the women who were pitching for funding, they were asked downward trending questions. What would you do if this went wrong? How would you overcome this problem? And ultimately, a human being, when you leave those conversations, you will remember the man's pitch more positively than the woman's, but you were the one that directed the questioning. So it's almost self-sabotage. So I've seen that on scale in interviews. I also, I studied people for 22 years in their patterns of behavior on who they feel confident in. Like, who makes you feel really confident that they will be able to do a job that they haven't done before, and why? And we all need to ask ourselves that, because ultimately that gets played out in interviews. Also, when it comes to promotions, this is one of the biggest recurring themes that comes back in the podcasts. Who's believed in to be promoted, and how much that person needs to tell you the evidence of what they've done again and again and again, but also how people respond to that evidence. We all know this, we've heard it 1,000 times before. A man is assertive, a woman is aggressive, when they've both said exactly the same thing, and this plays out en masse in who gets promoted, who's given the opportunity in the workplace. And very, very, very unfortunately, and there's so many reports on this, women are often character assassinated over their personality, whereas, women have to be likable, whereas men can be unlikable. And I know I'm simplifying this a lot, and I'm not even going into ethnic minority conversations, religious minority conversations, any of that, but I'm just touching upon some of the challenges. But ultimately, if we boil it all down, Bloomberg did a wonderful report a year ago showcasing that after 8 years in technology, we lose 50% of our women. So at the 8-year mark, they leave. And one of the biggest myths is that that's because that's around baby age. I'm speaking to all these women that are leaving. It's very, very rarely because they're having a baby. And I think that is another myth that we've got to shake off. We need to make this industry better for all people with all backgrounds, from all different personality types to thrive. And I think that will make us a stronger industry if we really focus on positive debate. The last thing I'd say on this, in terms of trends from the podcast, empathetic leadership. This is in the last 200 pods that I've recorded, that has come up in 85% of the conversations. So we got some work to do, but I've got to caveat all of this. We have got 650 examples of amazing people doing amazing work for inclusion that drives better performance from the people that work with them. And that's really exciting.
This is really exciting. But how much responsibility should also sit with the companies and leaders themselves? What does it mean for a leader to show real confidence in women, rather than simply telling I believe in you?
Yeah, totally. So this is why when I wrote my book, I called it Fintech Women Walk the Talk. And anyone who follows me on LinkedIn, I use the phrase walk the talk a lot. And that phrase has been with me since probably 2017, when I just got so tired of people saying that they were inclusive, but then their behaviors weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things I'm really trying to promote at the moment is the little things that we can all get involved in, the little decisions day to day in the office, on the Teams call, and this isn't only to focus on promoting women. This is anybody who is being excluded. It just happens to be in financial services and fintech that women are quite an easy minority to identify. But there are personality types that are minorities. You could have 8 men that look exactly the same on a Teams call, but I'm telling you now, they're all different personality types. They'll all have different perspectives. And we need to really work hard to support those different perspectives. We have moved backwards towards groupthink again, when what I loved about the onset of fintech and the growth of fintech was all about diversity of thought and challenging the status quo. And if we can remember that as leaders within this industry, and we can ask ourselves, when was the last time someone challenged me in the office? How did I respond? How welcoming am I for someone to tell me I'm wrong? When was the last time someone told me I'm wrong? Do I ask people, where did I get this wrong? How could have I improved? Imagine if tomorrow your CEO comes in, sits on your desk and said, hey, that meeting that we had yesterday, how could I have improved on that? Like everybody would go, ooh, can I tell you that really? But it's step one. Imagine if that becomes the norm, that we are looking to be so strong together. We're really focused on robust outcomes, that we want to understand how our message lands to lots of different personality types. So I'll walk the talk and say it. The way that I communicated in today's podcast, I would love to hear people's feedback on that. I have a lot of feedback on how I communicate, for some people, I'm too empathetic and too sensitive. For others, I tell the story in exactly a way that they can follow. To other people, I don't give enough facts, so it's more difficult for them to repeat my message to somebody else. So I always write up, and I've learned from that. This is why I wrote my book, and this is why I write articles, because I know I'm very empathetic in how I communicate. So I try and follow it up with clear, direct bullet points so different personalities can feel comfortable communicating with me. No one's perfect.
This is incredible. Absolutely love the idea of walk the talk. So we hope for the better inclusion in the future for the fintech space.
Women Leading the Way podcast.
Wonderful. I guess that we covered most of the topics I wanted to cover. But before we wrap up, let's do like a very quick fun segment called Traffic Light. We try to do with each guest in our podcast. The idea is quite simple. It's like driving. So green means start something new. Yellow means keep going. And red means pause or do less. So I'll ask you just 3 quick questions and you answer them without overthinking. Let's try it. Okay. Green light. So what's one thing you would like to start doing this year?
I would like to get more government policies and governance actually moving forward on the work that I do. Because right now, a lot of my work is one by one with every company. And I would love it that we had better standards from the policymakers in the industry. And I'd love to get involved in that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the key, right? If every company is trying to figure out it alone, change takes much longer. So I guess clear standards from the industry would make such a difference. So we're coming to the yellow light. What's the one thing you would like to keep going this year?
Still that one-on-one. Absolutely. So I spend a lot of time going into companies and supporting them in their hiring and making sure that they're filling the gaps that they have from a skills perspective, personality, innovation. And I want to make sure that I'm really making an impact on that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think that one-on-one work is where a lot of real change starts because companies can actually see their own gaps and like act on them. And we are coming to the red light. So what's one thing you would like to stop doing or maybe leave behind? Not about job, maybe about your life. Anything.
I need to stop overthink everything.
That's
and I
incredible.
Need to stop that. I need to let some of the negativity go and just focus on the positive.
Great. I think everyone should focus on the positive. Thank you so much. And one final question. What advice would you like to give to women who want to start building their career in fintech, but feel like they're not 100% ready to start?
Network. And when I say network, everyone thinks you must go to a networking event and say hello to someone you've never said hello to before. And I know that can stress people out. I think you can do a lot of online networking. Start following people in the industry that you're interested in, especially in the roles that they're in. Follow their companies, read the news that are coming out of those companies, read what they're posting, comment on their posts, reach out to them. You will learn so much from these experiences.
That's really great advice, and I completely agree. Like in fintech, crypto, blockchain, and financial services, networking and communication are so important because everything moves so quickly here, and you need to speak with different people, follow what companies are doing, and stay close to the conversation. And I think confidence grows through this conversation as well. I've heard this from so many women as well. The more you talk to people, ask questions, and share your thoughts, the more confident you start to feel. So, Nadia, thank you so much for this conversation. I think that today's episode really showed that like building career in fintech is not only about, I guess, having the right set of skills, but also about being seen and having the right opportunities, having people who are ready to support your growth. And I'm especially grateful that we talk about women and diversity because different perspectives help fintech build like stronger teams, make better decisions, and I guess that create opportunities for people to grow and lead. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
If this episode resonates with you, share it with the person who needs to hear it. For more stories and updates, visit womenlead.co.uk and follow us on our LinkedIn page. This was Women Leading the Way by Drofa Combs. Thanks for being with us and see you in the next episode. And don't forget, women don't just follow the way, they lead it.
Women Leading the Way. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.